Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the information you send us and become your expert guides. We don't just tell you what's there. We pull out the compelling threads, those real aha moments that make it all click.
Exactly. Think of it as going from having, a pile of research to truly understanding what it means together.
Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating story, Crossett, Arkansas.
Yeah, we've got a great set of sources for this deep dive, historical accounts that really bring the past to life. These incredibly detailed maps. It's like you can walk the early streets.
And photos, too, right? Glimpses into another time.
And our focus is the genesis and development of Crossett specifically as a company town, covering the period right up to 1955.
Okay, so our mission for you, the listener, is to get beyond just the dates and facts. We want to really understand the unique origins, the many layers of Crossett.
Right. It wasn't just some town that popped up. It was deliberately planned, an industrial community right there in the Deep South.
So we'll dig into its foundations, its economy, the society that grew there, and, the forces that shaped its evolution.
Get ready to connect some maybe surprising dots and get a really thorough but still engaging feel for this unique place.
Okay, let's dive in. Our story really kicks off in the late 1890s, moving into the early 1900s. That's the crucial time when Crossett was just an idea, really. What was the spark?
Well, the big draw, the initial pull, it was Southern pine. Simple as that almost.
But it wasn't just about the trees, was it? There was a bigger context.
Absolutely. You got to look at the whole industrial picture back then. Late 19th century, big shift in timber. The Great Lakes forests, they were getting seriously depleted.
Right, logged out, basically.
Yeah, and that created this vacuum.
Yeah.
So lumbermen, investors, they started looking south. Untapped potential.
So it speaks to that larger pattern, Industry chasing resources, moving on when one area is used up.
Often with big consequences, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Social, environmental, huge impacts. And in the South, they found this treasure trove, these massive, seemingly endless forests of southern yellow pine.
Stretching across states like Arkansas and Ashley County, where Crossett ended up. That was prime territory.
Oh, yeah. Dense woods, but surprisingly few people living there, especially out west in the county.
So yeah, this huge national demand for timber meeting a region with, well, not much already built.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Almost a blank canvas, you could say.
Yeah.
Perfect for large-scale industry to come in and set up shop with minimal existing constraints.
Okay, so who are the folks who saw this opportunity and jumped on it?
It was mainly a trio of investors, all from Davenport, Iowa, interestingly enough.
Iowa. Okay.
Yeah, Edward Savage Crossett, he's the namesake for the town, obviously. Sure. Charles Warner Gates and a Dr. John Wenzel Watzak.
And this connects to that idea of northern capital moving south, right? Looking for resources.
Definitely. A classic story. Crossett,
Yes.
He was already experienced in lumber, saw the potential decades earlier. Gates brought the hands-on lumber know-how as president.
And the doctor, Watzek.
He was actually Crossett's physician. It kind of shows how close those business and personal circles could be back then.
But having investors in Iowa is one thing. You need someone on the ground making it happen.
Right. And that was Edgar Woodward Cap Gates, Charles's brother. He was the first general manager, the guy running the show locally.
So turning investment into reality, what was his role exactly?
He was the linchpin, really. Huge responsibilities, picking the land, overseeing building the first sawmill, and crucially, planning the whole town.
And his management style. Sounds like it set the tone.
Yeah, described as just but stern. Very focused on productivity, didn't want any distractions as they saw it.
You wonder about the long-term effects of that kind of top-down control, don't you?
Definitely something to keep in mind as the town grows. So May 1899, the Crossett Lumber Company, CLC, is officially formed by those Iowa guys.
And job one was?
Land. Getting the timber rights. They snapped up this massive 47,000-acre tract, virgin pine, spanning Ashley County, Arkansas, and even down into Morehouse Parish, Louisiana.
Wow, 47,000 acres right off the bat. And how much did that cost them?
Just $7 an acre, apparently. Yeah. From a Michigan firm. But they didn't stop there.
Yeah.
By 1900, like a year later, they'd nearly doubled it. Almost 100,000 acres.
That's huge. Clearly thinking long-term resource security.
Oh, yeah. And the timber itself.
Yeah.
It's hard to picture. Sources talk about single pine trees having enough lumber for a whole 3-room house.
Incredible. Just visualizing that richness. Okay, so Cap Gates has the land, but now he needs to decide exactly where to build the mill, the town. Hamburg was the first idea.
Yeah, the existing town nearby.
Yeah.
But it didn't work out.
Why not?
Well, the Hamburg officials apparently got nervous, worried about losing their local labor force, especially black workers, to this new big company. And maybe just the social upheaval of a big sawmill operation moving in.
Okay, so Hamburg resists, and that turns out to be pivotal.
Absolutely pivotal. Instead of trying to fit into Hamburg, CLC makes this key decision. Build a whole new town from scratch, about 15 miles west.
Which gives them
Complete control, total autonomy. They could design everything, layout, buildings, rules, exactly how they wanted for maximum efficiency. No need to deal with existing politics or traditions.
That's a massive advantage for the company right from the start, establishes a clear power dynamic.
Definitely. And they moved fast. 1899 is basically a tent city while they rush build the first smaller sawmill.
Using the timber right there to build things.
Exactly. That first mill's lumber goes straight into building company offices, the company store, which was essential, and the first worker housing.
Such a practical loop. Resource extraction funding the infrastructure for more extraction.
And then by April 1903, the town of Crossett is formally incorporated. But, even with incorporation, CLC kept a very firm hand on the tiller.
Right. Incorporation didn't mean independence, not really. And that company control, it extended to pretty much everything. Housing, for instance.
Oh yeah, housing was a big one. Very uniform, apparently. 4- and 5-room frame houses, often painted this standard steel gray color. Picket fences even.
Creating a very orderly look, I imagine. Maybe a bit sterile?
Could be. Very controlled aesthetic. And there's actually a pre-1910 mill house preserved in Crossett City Park today. Gives you a real sense of what they were like.
And before those, the very first workers.
Basic canvas roof structures. Shows how quickly they needed to get something up in that isolated spot.
And the company store, the Crossett Mercantile Company. That sounds crucial.
Absolutely vital, especially early on. Crossett was pretty isolated. It was often the only place to get essentials.
More than just a store, then. The economic heart?
In many ways, yes. And they use a punch card credit system. Like company scrip, basically.
Which offered credit, useful in a remote place, but
also potentially tied workers economically to the company. Created dependence. We've got a great postcard image of it. You can really picture it as a hub.
And for visitors, officials, new hires.
They built the Rose Inn Company Hotel. Quite substantial, judging by the postcards from the 20s and 50s.
Another piece of that self-contained world. Accommodating people essential to the business. Projecting an image.
Exactly. And religion was part of that planned community, too. CLC was actively involved in setting up churches.
Like the Crossett Methodist Church. There's that famous story.
Yeah, about them building the first church literally overnight in 1902 on a prime spot, Main and 2nd.
Why the rush?
Apparently to block a saloon from opening on that same corner. They used an old Arkansas law about proximity to churches to, shape the town's moral landscape.
Wow. Talk about direct intervention. Pure paternalism.
It really sums up that approach. And even basic utilities came early: electricity from the sawmill generator, phones by 1907.
Again, needing to attract and keep workers in a remote spot. Provide modern conveniences.
Precisely. And if you really want to see how Crossett grew physically, those Sanborn fire insurance maps are amazing.
Right, the detailed maps for insurance purposes, what do they show?
Everything. Building footprints, construction materials, street names, property lines, fire hydrants, water mains, block by block, from 1908 up to 1943 in our sources.
So you can track the growth, the layout, maybe even see patterns of segregation?
Potentially, yes. They're an incredible visual record of how the town was organized and evolved under company control.
So, wrapping up this early phase, founding Crossett independently was key. It gave CLC maximum control.
Total control. Focused on industrial efficiency, minimal outside interference.
And building all that infrastructure fast wasn't just nice to have, it was essential.
Strategic necessity. You need workers for those mills, and in an isolated place, you have to provide the basics and more to get them and keep them.
And Capgates's vision really shines through. Not just mills and houses, but engineering the whole social environment.
Yeah, that church before saloon thing says it all. Aiming for a stable, productive workforce through, carefully managed paternalism.
Okay, let's move into the main industrial pillars. We're looking at, say, 1900 to 1955. Timber, of course, but then paper and chemicals join the mix. Back to timber first, the sawmill.
Right, and they didn't just build one giant mill. They phased it. That first small mill in 99. Super practical. It provided lumber to build the bigger mills and the first town buildings. Later, they even converted it to handle hardwoods. Smart use of resources.
And then the big guns came online.
Yeah, 1902, the first big pine mill complex. Bandsaws, dry kilns, planer mill, high volume, quality stuff. Then in 1905, another big pine mill expansion.
Boosting capacity like crazy.
Oh yeah, by 1915, they could churn out 84 million board feet a year. That photo of Mill No. 2 really gives you a sense of the scale.
And they didn't ignore the hardwoods either.
No, that smaller hardwood mill was important too. Railroad ties crucial for their own logging lines, construction timbers, commercial hardwood, using it all.
Okay, feeding these giant mills required constant logging, which meant logging camps. Early ones weren't great.
No, the first camps, 1902, 1904, west of town. Pretty basic, tough living. And they had to move as the timber ran out nearby.
But the company learned, maybe. The containment camps.
Huh, yeah, quite the name. After 1912, places like Hickory Grove, Prairie du Butte, they definitely had better housing, more amenities.
Why the change? Realizing they needed stable workers.
Exactly. Trying to retain experienced loggers by making life a bit more, well, content. It was still tough work, but the conditions improved.
And the biggest one was Crossett Camp itself, 1920 to 1934. Sounds like a real town.
Pretty much. A consolidated camp, proper houses, running water, electric lights, schools, a big company store even had ice, a YMCA.
Wow. And we have a map of it.
Yeah, from 1931. Shows over 200 homes laid out in blocks, but it also clearly shows segregated housing, separate blocks labeled for colored workers.
Right. That segregation reality again. Sanborn Maps called it Crossett Camp No. 2.
Same place. Documented the segregation too. Standard practice, unfortunately.
Now here's a twist. CLC wasn't just cutting trees down, they were thinking sustainably.
This is really significant. Unlike that typical cut-out and get-out approach, CLC leadership, probably Cap Gates involved here too, recognized early that the forests weren't infinite.
So they started managing them differently.
Yeah. In 1926, they hired W.K. Williams, a Yale forestry grad. He was influenced by Professor Chapman at Yale. His job, implement sustained yield forestry.
Sustained yield. What does that mean, practically?
It means managing the forest for the long term. Things like selective cutting, only taking mature trees, letting the forest reseed naturally, continuous monitoring and management. A huge departure from just clear-cutting everything.
That sounds incredibly advanced for the 1920s timber industry. Was Crossett unusual in this? Did it influence others?
It seems they were definitely ahead of the curve, and the Yale connection got deeper. Led to the Crossett Experimental Forest in 1934.
Okay, what was that?
CLC donated almost 1,700 acres to the Southern Forest Experiment Station, part of the USDA Forest Service. It became the first USDA Forest Service research station in the South.
Wow, focused on.
Managing second-growth pine loblolly and shortleaf. Developing sustainable, economically sound forestry models for the whole region. Really groundbreaking stuff.
So lumber and forestry innovation?
Yeah.
But they didn't stop there. Paper and chemicals.
Exactly. Diversification. Maximizing value. The Crossett paper mill started mid-1930s, maybe 36, 37.
That's huge. Why huge? What did it let them do?
Use the smaller logs, treetops, wood chip stuff left over from lumbering. Turn that waste into valuable craft paper. Strong brown paper for bags, wrapping, liner board.
Turning byproducts into profit.
Totally. And later, they expanded into even more paper products. That photo from around 1940 shows the paper mill was already a massive industrial complex.
And then chemicals and charcoal.
Yeah, the Crossett Chemical Company. Another way to squeeze value out of wood waste and the pulping leftovers from making paper.
What kind of chemicals?
Wood alcohol, methanol, turpentine, other stuff used in soaps, paints. And the charcoal plant, late 1920s, another outlet for wood scraps.
It's like they were determined to use every single splinter. Impressive efficiency, at least from that era's perspective.
Right. Efficiency was the goal. Environmental impact wasn't the main concern back then, obviously.
So timber, paper, chemicals, this integrated system. How did it affect Crossett's economy, its stability up to 55?
It basically was the economy. This integration created a really robust, stable base, lots of jobs, relatively secure employment.
Especially during bad times nationally, like the Great Depression.
Exactly. Crossett weathered the Depression surprisingly well. Demand for their diverse products stayed fairly steady. Unemployment was low compared to elsewhere. Company was financially strong.
And World War II?
CLC was a major lumber supplier for the war effort. That kept things humming, solidified their economic importance. By 1955, CLC was absolutely the dominant employer, no question.
Any idea of the numbers employed back then?
Hard to pin down exact 1955 figures from these sources, but later data, like 1,500 in paper alone by 2006, suggests the combined workforce mid-century was already really substantial.
So that vertical integration, using byproducts, key to success.
Crucial. Along with that forward-thinking sustainable forestry. That prevented the boom and bust cycles you saw in so many other lumber towns. Ensured they had raw materials for the long haul. The experimental forest became super influential.
And none of it works without getting logs in and products out? Railroads must have been vital.
Absolutely essential. Lifeline. The Crossett Railway, later the Ashley Drew and Northern. Critical for hauling logs, shipping finished goods. Plus, they had this huge network of their own logging railroads deep into the forests.
Okay, so I've got the industrial engine. Let's shift back to life in the town. Under company rule, 1900, 1955, society, culture, and the unavoidable issue of race.
Yeah, and that company control was just total, especially early on. Owned the land, mills, housing.
The WPA guide from the 30s really hammers this home, right? Company influence over everything, business, schools, social life, even religion. Mentioned company money for ministers, barbers.
That's right. It shows how tangled the company was in everyday life. And Capgates's stern paternalism set the tone. No distractions, no undesirables. Drinking, gambling, labor organizers, not welcome.
That church built overnight to block a saloon. Perfect example.
Exactly. And the company store, the Crossett Mercantile, with that punch card credit system, reinforced economic dependence.
But it wasn't all just top-down control. There was a sense of community.
Seems so.
Yeah.
Especially in those isolated logging camps, people really relied on each other, described it like one big family.
That mix, again, tight control, but also community bonds forming. And this company ownership model lasted a long time.
Yeah, Crossett was a classic mill town in that sense, right up until 1946. That's when they finally started selling the houses to employees. A big shift.
Interesting. And alongside incorporated Crossett, these other communities popped up. North Crossett, South, West.
Unincorporated areas on the fringe. Why they formed isn't crystal clear from our sources for this period.
Maybe escaping the company's tight planning, or just overflow.
Could be either or both. Maybe offered more autonomy, different kinds of work, a chance to own property, outside direct CLC control. It's a common pattern around company towns, these fringe settlements.
Now, we have to talk about race. Jim Crow South, segregation was just the law of the land.
Absolutely fundamental, not just custom, but law. It permeated everything.
And clearly visible in Crossett housing, for example.
Definitely. We saw that in the Crossett camp plat, separate blocks for colored workers. Sanborn maps confirm it. Standard practice in southern sawmill towns then. And HOLC redlining likely made it worse, just like everywhere else.
Let's talk about the African-American community specifically. Churches must have been vital.
Immensely important. CLC reportedly built churches for both races. We know the Methodist Church was linked to the white community. First Baptist, from that 55 photo, almost certainly white too, given the era.
Specific black churches before 55 names, locations.
Details are scarce in these sources, but they absolutely existed. Huge black workforce implies churches, and churches were pillars of black communities, providing spiritual support, social structure, maybe a degree of independence, even if CLC built the building.
And schools, also segregated, of course.
Strictly. Negro schools or colored schools. Names like Ashley County Training School or T.W. Daniel come up for the area. But their exact role in Crossett before 55 isn't pinned down here.
Rosenwald Fund helped build black schools in the county.
Yes, the fund was active in Ashley County, but no specific Crossett school is named in our material. What's almost certain, though, is a big gap in resources compared to white schools.
So segregation meant unequal access, limited opportunity, constant discrimination.
And the ever-present threat of violence. It wasn't just separate, it was oppression.
Social clubs, businesses within the black community pre-55, limited info.
Yeah, unfortunately common in records from that time. Black experience is often marginalized. But daily life happened within that segregated structure. Jobs at CLC were mostly manual labor, lower pay.
And the violence, the lynchings documented in the sources, we have to acknowledge them.
We absolutely do. They're horrific, but crucial to understanding the reality. Glencoe Bays burned at the stake, 1904. Another unknown black man lynched the same year.
And Frank Tucker in 1932.
A black lumber mill worker, accused of attacking a deputy marshal, lynched, his body paraded, hanged in front of hundreds, no arrests.
Brutal. Stark reminders of racial terror and the lack of justice.
It shows the extreme vulnerability, the impunity for violence against African Americans.
Yeah.
A terrible reality of that time and place.
Okay, shifting to labor relations. Early years, not much trouble. Stern management kept things quiet.
Seems that way. Company power likely suppressed early union efforts. But that changed in 1940. Big strike.
Right, 58 days. What triggered it?
CLC refused to grant a union shop, even though they'd recognized a local union. It nearly shut the town down.
And a local minister helped mediate.
Reverend Aubrey C. Halsell, yeah, helped broker a compromise. The key outcome. Workers in the manufacturing plants won the right to have trade unions.
A significant shift, then, away from total company control over labor.
Definitely. More towards negotiation, aligning with national trends. So life under company rule was this complex mix. Paternalism, community for some.
Alongside rigid segregation and terror for others.
Exactly. Company power shaped everything and forced inequality. And maybe those fringe communities were a small way of seeking space outside that control.
And the 1940s strike a sign that collective action could force change, even there.
A real turning point. Showed paternalism wasn't absolute anymore.
Okay, let's look at building community within this system. Education, civic life, architecture, up to 55.
Right. The founders wanted a first-class school system. Why? To attract a stable white workforce. Company invested directly in schools.
But segregated schools, Crossett High for white students got accredited, a mark of quality.
Yeah, North Central Association accreditation in the 40s. That was a big deal then. A draw for white families.
And for black students. The colored schools, we know they existed, but likely under-resourced.
Highly probable. Rosenwald Fund helped in the county. But specifics for Crossett schools pre-55 are thin here. They fulfilled the legal segregation requirement, provided some education, and jobs for black teachers. But equality wasn't the goal.
And rural schools consolidating into Crossett's system in the 40s.
Yeah, smaller schools joining the town system, likely for better facilities, teachers, curriculum, even within segregation, led to a big busing operation. Extended CLC's influence, in a way.
Then there's the Yale camp, established 46. That sounds unique.
Really fascinating collaboration. CLC built facilities cabins, dining hall east of town for Yale forestry students and faculty.
A living laboratory.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Used CLC forests and mills for intense field studies for 2 decades. Huge boost for forestry science and Crossett's reputation in the field.
Okay, civic institutions, healthcare. CLC had his own hospital early on.
Yeah, 1908. For employees and families. Dr. J.W. Spivey directed it for decades, 1912-1944, worked to improve services. Had affordable monthly rates for workers, too.
But the original building became inadequate.
By the end of WWII, yes. So the company sought advice, led to the Crossett Health Foundation in 45, planned a new, modern Crossett Health Center.
Big project, company funding.
Major company contribution plus federal funds. Opened in Feb 47. Much better facilities. Showed a commitment to worker health, which, of course, also benefits the company.
Churches again. Crossett Methodist, first congregation, built fast, then rebuilt.
Yeah, second building in 1904, then a big new sanctuary dedicated in 1949, land donated by CLC for that one too.
First Baptist, probably the main white Baptist church.
Highly likely, given segregation and the Methodist origins, and black churches CLC reportedly built them, but details are missing pre-55. Still vital community centers, regardless of who built the structure.
Architecturally, what did Crossett look like? Dominated by CLC, obviously.
Especially early on. Those uniform company houses, the gray paint, picket fences, created a very distinct, homogeneous look. That preserved mill house gives a good feel for it.
Public buildings. The Rose Inn looks substantial. The mercantile store was the main hub.
Right. And then in 1954, the Crossett Municipal Building. Art Deco style, brick and limestone. Centralizing city services. Sign of a maturing town, moving beyond just company structures.
And the Sanborn maps tie it all together visually. Layout, growth, industry versus residential.
Invaluable. Show the planned nature, the scale of company property, how it evolved. The WPA guide called it entirely company-owned in the 30s. Even the logging camp layout was planned, with those segregated blocks. Mill right in the center.
So first-class schools attracted white workers. Segregated schools met legal minimums for black residents, likely unequally. Consolidation extended influence.
Yep, and company involvement in hospitals, churches reinforced paternalism, but provided stability services, especially for whites. Health center was a big investment.
Architecturally, evolving from basic worker housing to more substantial public buildings, maturing town look. Sanborns track it all.
Exactly, a visual story of planned development and gradual change.
Let's focus on key people and families. The founders, Crossett, Watzek, Gates from Iowa.
They provided the initial vision, the capital, the spark.
Edward S. Crossett, the namesake, experienced lumberman. Charles W. Gates, president, practical expertise. Dr. Watzek, the physician, showing those close ties.
Right, and their family influence lasted. Descendants stayed involved through stock, leadership. The Health Foundation in the 40s had Crossett's Ratzeks involved. Shows ongoing commitment.
But that commitment could change with generations. E.C. Crossett's death in 55, heirs wanting to sell stock.
Exactly. That became a critical moment, hinting at big changes down the road, a potential break in that long family control.
Then back on the ground, the indispensable manager, Cap Gates.
Absolutely crucial. He made the Iowa vision happen, site selection, land buying, mill building, town planning. He oversaw it all.
And his just but stern style shaped early Crossett's. Order and productivity first. Huge figure until his death in 35.
Definitely. And others too, W.K. Williams with the forestry innovations, Dr. Spivey at the hospital for so long, Reverend Halsell mediating the 40 strike.
But beyond the names and the records,
We absolutely have to acknowledge the thousands of unnamed workers, loggers, mill hands, residents. Their labor was the real engine. Their lives were shaped by CLC, by segregation.
it's that synergy, isn't it? Distant capital, local management, Iowa investors, Cap Gates, making it work.
Yeah, and family continuity helped, but generational shifts bring change, like the stock sale issue in 55. And always that workforce underpinning everything.
So, Crossett at mid-century, around 1940 to 1955. What's stable? What's starting to shift?
Well, a key continuity was that economic resilience.
Yeah.
Through the Depression, through WWII, Crossett's economy held up remarkably well.
That diversified base, again, timber, paper, chemicals keeping demand steady, war contracts helping too.
Exactly.
So-
Relatively stable employment when many places struggled badly. But post-war, big changes started happening too, like selling the company houses in 46.
Huge step away from the classic company town model, right? Fostering individual ownership.
Definitely. A major shift. Though CLC's industrial dominance absolutely continued. Timber, paper, chemicals were still the pillars.
Civic life evolving too. New church sanctuary, that Art Deco municipal building in 54. Looks like a maturing town.
Yeah, signs of a developing civic identity separate from just the company. Education still segregated, Yale camp operating, labor relations more formalized after the 40 strike, with unions established.
But under the surface, within CLC itself, things were stirring.
That's the subtle but important part. Edward C. Crossett's death in 55, his heirs wanting to sell that big block of stock, that created real uncertainty inside the company.
Even with modernization happening.
Yeah, but shareholder desire to cash out led to those merger talks later, ending with Georgia Pacific taking over in 62.
So 1955 really feels like an inflection point. The end of that direct founding family control was on the horizon.
I think so. Resilience came from diversification. Selling houses changed the town dynamic, and those internal shareholder issues were setting the stage for the next chapter. Classic catalysts for change in family firms.
Okay, let's wrap up our deep dive for Crossett up to 1955. Key defining traits.
Purpose-built, totally forest-dependent economy. Planned, controlled community. Strong paternalism, but existing right alongside deep segregation and racial violence. Pioneering forestry, surprisingly. And railroads absolutely vital.
And how does Crossett's story connect to bigger historical themes?
It's a great example of that Southern company town model. Shows the New South industrializing with Northern money. And sadly, it reflects those broader national, regional patterns in labor and especially race relations.
So by 1955, a mature industrial town, complex legacy, progress, innovation, but deep social inequities, and hints of big changes coming with housing shifts and company ownership dynamics.
Yeah, definitely standing at a pivotal moment.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener. Thinking about Crossett's story, consider the enduring complexities of industrial development, especially in the South. How progress and social injustice can be so tightly woven together.
And how does the legacy of a place like this, a company town, continue to shape communities even today?
Right. What parts of this history resonate with things we still talk about? Corporate influence, community development, the fight for social equity. Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.